Hey Math 7, this is Mrs. Cervantes.
And Mrs. Talati.
And together we are Mrs. Cervati.
Cervati.
Alright, open your note takers to 3.4 rational numbers. Your I can statement for today is I can multiply fractions and decimals. The purple box again is just a review of your rules for signs. So if you're multiplying fractions or decimals, if you have, so let's look here. This one doesn't give you all the rules. This is saying if one factor is positive and the other factor is negative, it's a negative answer. If the first factor is negative and the second factor is positive, that's negative also. So this still, they're not including the same signs rules. So these are different signs. These are the rules for different signs, which is the way we teach you guys it, right? Those are different signs. So same signs, they're just assuming that you still know this one, that same signs is always a positive answer when you're multiplying. It doesn't matter if it's fractions, decimals, integers, any rational numbers, right? And then quick review. Rational numbers, ratio is the key word, so it's any number that can be written as a fraction, okay? All right, let's look at page 2. Ms. Talati is doing multiplying with you.
So what we decided to do on these note takers was kind of give you a little refresher with the step-by-step instructions, right? So if you guys notice on the left-hand side, it says multiplying decimals, and you have 3 steps. Step 1 is you're going to multiply like whole numbers. Step 2 is you're going to count the decimals in place of the problem. Count decimal places in the problem. And number 3, put the same number of places behind the decimal. Now, this is interesting.
I know. So when
Yeah.
I went through that on the video for Math 7-8, I don't like the way they did it.
No, so we're going
They
to
skipped the whole, and that's what kids are going to do.
Yeah, so you guys did not learn, so watch. I liked it because it was color coded, but we need to review a couple things because when we gave you guys number 4 on a quick check for 3, actually it was just, 3-1. Many of you know how to multiply multi-digit numbers, but you forget about the place value. So remember, I'm going to multiply 2 times 4, which gives me 8. 3 times 2 gives me 6. 2 times 2 gives me 4, right? So ultimately, I just multiplied this set of numbers. Now I have to remember my place value holder, because now I'm going to multiply 1 times 4 and get 4, 1 times 3 and I get 3, and 1 times 2 and I get 2, right? So then when I bring down and add, I get 8 plus 0 is 8. I get a 10 carry here. This gives me an 8 and a 2. And then step 2 says to count. So we go 1, 2, 3. And then step 3, if I go 1, 2, 3, that's where they get the 2.808. Okay, so I'll show you again. Now listen, one thing that Cervantes talked about in the, it must have been a subtraction of decimals, I can't remember, but this is a 1-digit number and this is a 2-digit number, right? We need to put the bigger one on top. And then I multiply by 2, right? If I go back to my triangle, I'm going to identify that this problem has a positive, so I cover the positive, and a negative. So therefore my answer is a negative. I go 2 times 5 is 10, carry the 1, 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. I have one number after my decimal, so I go one number in, so my answer is just a negative 7. And again, review, we're just now incorporating the positive and negative signs into it. Take a look at the second one. This is a 1-digit number and a 3-digit number. So now I'm going to put my 1.25 or 1 in 25 hundredths on the top times the 3. I'm going to also just show you as we repeat, that's all I want to do, the rules that in this particular problem I have a negative times a negative, which means my solution will be a positive. 3 times 5 is 15, carry the 1. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. 3 times 1 is 3. I'm going to go back and look that I have 1, 2, 1, 2. And remember, we are inserting our decimal from the right side, moving left to put our decimal in place. So our final answer is a positive 3 in 75 hundredths. Okay? Number 3, Gina hiked down a canyon and stopped each time she descended 1/2 mile to rest. She hiked a total of 4 sections. What is her overall change in elevation? So this is actually a fraction problem that we're going to come back to as Cervantes teaches you multiplication of fractions. Cervantes, you are up.
Okay, so let's look at multiplying fractions. If you look in the colored area, so you have 3/4 times 1/2. Reminder here, you do not need a common denominator. If you are adding and subtracting, you definitely need a common denominator, but when you are multiplying, you do not. So they keep it 3/4 times 1/2. You can look at that and multiply your numerators, 3 times 1 over your denominators, 4 times 2, and you get 3/8, okay? If you're looking at that, let's look at number 4 and 5 first. So let's look up here. Now we're looking at negatives and positives. So I could look at this as -3 times -7 and 5 times 8. My negatives, I always put, and I explain to my class, if the negative's out front, I always make my numerator negative. I just stay consistent. And that way I know what I'm doing each time. If you make both of those negative, it changes the whole problem because it then becomes positive, remember that, okay? So -3 times -7 is positive 21. 8 times 5 is 40. And then you're looking for a common factor. And do we have a common factor for 21? We don't, or 21 and 40, and there is not a common factor for 21 and 40. So then you are finished. That is your simplified answer, okay? Number 5, don't forget, -10, any whole integer is just over 1, the denominator is 1. Some people are forgetting that. So if I rewrite this one, it would be -10, my numerator, times -2, over my denominators, 1 times 5. Multiply them out, -10 times -2 is a positive 20. 1 times 5 is a 5. You're looking at an improper fraction because your numerator is greater than your denominator. 20 divided by 5 gives you a positive 4. Okay, and then you can check your answers. Negative times a negative gives you the positive, and then here a negative times a negative gives you the positive. Okay? All right, look at this one. It has 3 terms in it. -2/3, -1/2, and -3/5. You can do this 2 different ways. So we talked about, did you talk about with your kids that if you add up the number of negative signs and it's an odd number, the answer is negative?
Only with 7, 8, not with 7.
Okay. So do we want to go there with them?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So listen. When you're looking at your rules for multiplying fractions with your signs, the rule says when you're multiplying 2 integers, if they're the same sign, your answer is positive. If they're different signs, your answer is negative. But it never talks about, the rule does not address 3 terms being multiplied together, okay? So one way to do 3 terms multiplied together is you can always count up the number of negative signs in your multiplication problem. And because there's 3 negative signs and that's an odd number, an odd amount of negative signs, your answer is going to be negative. If there's an even number of negative signs, your answer will be positive. And then now I can just go straight across if I want and say 2 times 1 times 3 over 3 times 2 times 5. Keep it negative. 2 times 1 is 2 times 3 is 6. 3 times 2 is 6 times 5 is 30. And then I can reduce that. Both of these divide by 6. Use your common factor. -6 divided by 6 is -1. 30 divided by 6 is 5. So it's -1/5. Now, another way some people might do this is they might just do 2 at a time and then apply their rules. So 2 times 1 is 2. 3 times 2 is 6. A negative times a negative is a positive. And then they might then multiply by -3/5. So 2 times -3 is -6. 6 times 5 is 30. And again, those divide by 6, so that's a -1/5. So you're going to get the same answer 2 different ways to do the problem, okay?
So now that you guys have looked at multiplication of fractions with Mrs. Cervantes, we can look at the word problem. Gina hiked down a canyon and stopped each time she descended 1/4 mile. So I'm going to write that as a -1/2, right? When we go down, it's going to be a negative. She hiked a total of 4 sections. So ultimately, we're going to multiply that 4 times 1/2. But remember, I just wrote it as a whole number because then we got to remember that we write 4 as a whole number as 4 over 1. I'm going to multiply straight across with my -1/2. A positive times a negative is a negative. 4 times 1 is 4. 1 times 2 is 2. We have an improper fraction. Take my negative sign, and then 2 goes into 4 2 times. And then what was her overall change in elevation? We should say as a sentence, she descended, that's our negative, right? 2 miles. in her elevation. That means she walked down, right? Not backwards. All right, so you guys have some additional practice problems to do. Remember, you can show the work right on the tab or underneath based on space or handwriting, but you do need to have work on these problems. Have a great day.